What do you think about companies paying for egg freezing?
Women don't really know their own minds. You're just a lady with our little lady brains.
I would go one step further and say that I think it's probably frowned upon to be open about sort of vetting and judging, your partner as a future spouse and parent.
The most dangerous time for a woman in terms of domestic violence with a partner is when she is pregnant.
So what you're saying to me is that you are wealthy enough that you are happy to endanger the life of another woman.
She said, you'll never know the man you marry until you have children. I know, it's so apocalyptic.
Hi, I'm Christina Rhodes.
And I'm Tempest Rose.
We are two millennial women 4 decades in.
We're revisiting the culture that made us, with a little more hindsight.
And a lot less bullshit.
We've made our own rules.
Built our own spotlights.
And we're here to speak our minds without playing dumb.
And without playing nice.
It's our first episode! Yay! Cheers! So, each episode, our plan, being millennials, which means that we still drink unlike the younger generation.
Exactly.
We thought we would open a bottle of something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the first episode, so we're having some bubbles.
To celebrate.
Prosecco, because we both worked in Bel Air.
Mm-hmm.
That's all we ever drink.
Mother's milk.
Mm. And we've both reached 40.
I know. Congratulations, us.
Now you're 40. Do you feel differently about things?
I do. I think it took a year, the kind of transitional year from turning 39 to turning 40, to realize that I just don't give a fuck about what anybody else thinks. And I do, obviously. Like, you still wake up some days and, you care a little bit. But I'm not, I still get dressed in the morning and try and, enter society to some degree. But there's a lot of stuff that I've let go of in terms of what I care about, what other people think. Because, we lost a family member last year as well, in that same transitional year. And you just realize you get one shot, Tempest. One shot. So you might as well enjoy it.
Very true. Very true.
And you?
I found when I got to 40, so when you're in a decade and you think there's no fashion, and then a few years into the next decade, all of a sudden you're wondering why we were all wearing exactly the same thing at the same time.
Yes.
And I find coming into my 40s, I can now see my generation, which was one of the inspirations for doing this podcast, in a way that just, here we all were pottering along, living our lives. And now I can see the trends that are very specific to millennials. And I think we're older millennials. So again, that's kind of different. Younger millennials, I'm sure we'll get into this.
Yeah.
Zennials, I think, are different. And I definitely would maybe say I'm more of an ex-zennial. And so, you just enter this phase, I think, of being much more kind of contemplatory over life, what the different stages are. You've had enough experience, I think, to understand that you go through different cycles as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I definitely feel when you get to 40, you do suddenly go, oh, I'm going to have a little look at all of this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, we obviously, our friendship spans, 15 years now? 12 years?
Yeah, about 15.
15. And so I feel like we've had these conversations over a bottle of Prosecco or two sometimes.
Yeah. Each.
Where we would set the world right. And obviously, I think that's always been something that's been important to both of us, as we're both quite passionate about what's going on in the world and where is our place, where is women's places, what's sort of happening in society at large. But I think the nature of the conversations, which I'm really excited about for this podcast, are going to have evolved a little bit into sort of being able to take that step back and sort of see a greater picture, because you just do have the gift of time to be able to do so.
Do you have any hopes for the podcast?
I do. I just feel like we live in a world now, not to cast big generalizations, but I think there's a trend in the world now around self-censorship, around not being comfortable to have debate and discourse with other people, I mean, obviously I'm American, which I think everyone can hear. And when I was growing up, you know, there were still two parties in America, for example, so Democrats and Republicans, but there were shades to each of those parties. And you could be friends with and have family members who voted differently than you. Politics was just one side of who you were, right, as a multifaceted human being. But I feel like now, I know a lot of people in the US who just will not speak to somebody who votes on the other side of the aisle as them, as though everybody in America agrees completely and 100% on all of the issues that they see the Republicans or the Democrats standing for. And that's just nonsense. It doesn't help anybody to approach life like that. So my hope for this is that obviously we just get to do what we love doing, which is having a good hash out about it all. But yeah, that we also create, you know, hopefully interesting conversations and ways of thinking about things, and that we encourage the people who are listening to do the same and to think freely about stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you and I both work in the arts as well. And I've definitely noticed a big shift in this idea of like even questions being demonized, asking questions, wanting to find out. And so many people I know actually just wait. And I've been guilty of this too. You wait to find out what the group consensus is, and then you speak your opinion. There's not really a lot of sense of, there's a lot of waiting to hear what the groupthink opinion is, and very little tolerance for people wanting to say, oh, I thought this or I thought that. And I've literally watched online even the process of asking a question at all, regardless of what that question is, being demonized. I think it's really unhealthy. I think it's made all of our ideas and opinions a little weaker. I think it's made us very scared to speak our minds. And it means, this is the thing I don't understand with it. Like if you have a really firm opinion on something, and when you get to our age, you'll realize that like, that's not really true. You're going to think differently about different things at different parts of your life. But do you not want to hear what the counterpoint to that might be, even if it's just so you can then understand how to maybe talk someone round on that, or say, oh, well, actually, maybe that's not really what you think it is. Like, how can your ideas be robust if you've got no idea what the other opposing perspectives are on the subject? It makes us all weaker, I think, even in our convictions. So many conversations I've had with people where I've been able to say, oh, okay, but have you seen this? Or what do you think about that? And they've just never even heard of a point of view that isn't their own. I find that creepy.
No, I think it's super creepy. I also think it's terrifying that I see a lot of people not being able to recognize, you know, when there's a news bias. This is not new, but I think when we were growing up, there was still a level of education around critical thinking and knowing that the press is going to have a bias, that people have bias, it's natural, and being able to sort of decipher that, think about it yourself, and then form your own opinion. And I think some of that has maybe been lost too.
I wonder about that. Yeah, at school we studied primary sources, secondary sources, how to hear bias in a tone. Like, is the first person narrative, is it a reliable narrator? I don't know if that stuff still gets discussed. You would think in the internet age where anyone can write anything, being able to critically assess what you're reading, the opinions that you're hearing would be even more important now than it ever was. But yeah, so I think for both of us with this podcast is that we can get back to this idea. You can tell me if it's super British of just going to the pub, having some wines, going, I thought about this, yeah, it's a load of shit. And at the end of it, actually feeling like you'd aired out a discussion, you got to bond a little more and understand the people around you a little bit more. You understood that everybody was working stuff out in the moment. And there was like a fun to that. You know, people didn't have their whole lives destroyed on like a word or a turn of phrase. You know, these things, they're transient. And again, I assume probably something you learn the older that you get. And we really miss that. And I know lots of other people really miss it. So I've done a podcast before, as some of you will know. And what I'm going to really try in this podcast is to not self-censor everything I say and to not wait until I'm 100% sure on something, in the hope that we start to normalize that a little bit more. this idea of stretching out our ideas, of listening to each other, knowing that we can change our minds. And like, look, I now, when I listen to, and I actively try and listen to points of view that aren't mine, when I'm listening to a podcast at home on my own, if I don't agree with what I'm hearing, I ask myself why. And if I can't explain it to myself, then I either don't, my opinions aren't as solid as they perhaps should be, if that's what I really believe. So I need to like think a bit more about why I feel that way, or I need to go and do some more reading to make sure I fully understood what the situation is. And I feel like it makes me smarter. No, like,
yeah, absolutely. Because it's self-reflection. It's, taking time to think about why you think about something, why you believe something. And yeah, I think this show is going to be based around opinions. I think it's important that we state that, these are opinions. We see opinions as malleable and flexible. We don't always agree on things.
Yeah.
We don't always, see absolutely eye to eye on everything. And I think that's hopefully going to make for some interesting discussions and some of the things we're going to talk about. And that we are really open to hearing from those of you who are listening around if you disagree with us, why? And so that we can also reformulate our opinions and our thoughts. And it's an evolving process rather than this being a news show where we're going to tell you what the truth is and you must abide by that.
Yeah.
So help you.
So if we say something that you really disagree with, then congratulations, you're welcome. We've just made you smarter.
Yeah. It's what we're saying.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So we're going to dive right in with the topic of children. I love them very much. I do.
But I couldn't eat a whole one. So.
Truth. No, but we both have chosen not to have children.
Mm-hmm.
Conscious decision, deliberate decision. And we know a lot of people who have made that decision. We know a lot of people who also have children. But we thought it would be a really interesting topic to begin with because, it's such a huge part of many women's lives. It's a huge part of many people's identity as being a parent and being a mother in particular. And also, I think it's evolved a lot in terms of choosing to be childless is much much less of a taboo thing now than it used to be.
Child-free.
Child-free.
Child more.
That makes sense.
It does not make sense.
Cutting you off already.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, it's a millennial thing as well. Birth rates went down with millennials. So it's a big thing, I think, of our generation to have less children.
Yeah. Well, it's a crisis.
It is.
According to the government.
Apparently so, which we'll get into. Because I didn't even know about that until a few months ago.
Yeah, and to be fair, I didn't either. I mean,
I think some people think it's right-wing propaganda.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
We can come back to that.
Yeah. Well, so shall we begin with just sharing why we each chose to not have children? So I'll kick things off. When I was younger, I definitely thought I was going to have kids. And I think I didn't really question it. But that said, my mom tells stories about when my brother and I were little. I have an older brother who's 4 years older than me. And she said that even when I was 3 years old, I never wanted to play with babies. I never wanted to play with little kids who were younger than me and never, ever talked about wanting to have children. Versus my brother, even from a young age, would always pretend to be a dad, always pretend to have a family, to have like a doll's
so interesting.
Family. Yeah, and he's got 2 beautiful children who I love to pieces. But so I think for me, like, maybe that existed in the beginning, but definitely when I was a teenager and a younger adult, really thought that I was going to have them. And I think that there was maybe a couple of moments in my life where if things had worked out differently, I probably would have. Maybe not have given it the thought and consideration that I have now, but I think it would have felt like the natural thing to do. But I happened to meet my life partner when I was 36. I had just gotten out of a divorce. We were only married a short time, so children was not something we were looking at, thankfully. Yeah, but I think he was also raised, he'd always thought that he was going to have children. But, we got together, we sort of took things slow, and then it just kind of dawned on us. We have this wonderful life. I get to wake up on a Saturday morning and decide whether or not I want to sleep in or go for a walk, go to a spin class. These are decisions you cannot make if you have a screaming baby in the next room because they need
it's certainly frowned upon
for the rest of their life. And that's beautiful and it's amazing. But And there's that reason. There was, which I think can sound really selfish, but I also really firmly believe that there are millions of children who are born every year, unfortunately, who are not wanted, sometimes abandoned, that is an absolute tragedy. And I also think that a lot of people, I think this is also a tragedy, is that people just have children and they don't take the time to think about it. And they can end up being horrible parents who their children grow up with all sorts of, maladies and stresses. And it's just like, who benefits from that situation? And I think unless I'm now taking the position that, we gratefully have a lot of really small, really wonderful children in our life who we can play a big part in their life growing up, and we can be a different role for them than being a parent, which I think is also it's important to have adults, role models in your life who are not your parents and who are another safe space that you can speak to them and be with them and sort of grow up with them. But unless you have this like absolute, dying need to have children, and you are so committed to being a fucking amazing parent, then you shouldn't have them. And I wasn't prepared to make that choice.
Yeah, I totally get it. I think it's still a taboo, particularly for women, to say that they regret having their children. And there are a few like accounts, aren't there, and blogs and newspaper articles that come out, and they're mostly anonymous, obviously, also to protect your children. I mean, you don't necessarily want to read in the Times that your mother wished she never had you. But, I'll tell my story in a second, but just to dovetail off what you were talking about, like, there's a lot of women who have children because it's expected of them. And you could say that for men and women, of course, but as I'm sure we'll get into, the literal labor, let alone the just sort of day-to-day work of having children, particularly at the beginning of a baby's life and conception, falls to the woman, of course. And so it's a huge undertaking. It's a huge change in your life, massively. And it's a massive thing to go through if it's not something that you really want, but you feel under family pressure or societal pressure, or even just pressure from your partners. I know women who have gotten married or settled down and they sort of say, oh, yeah, I don't really want to have kids, but my husband does or my partner does, so I guess we'll have them. I always found that really disturbing. And like, look, when they've had children, they love these children. They seem very happy. I'm sure when you become a parent, become a mother, that bond is something you maybe can't imagine in life before. It's very different. I'm guessing, there'll be an element of it that unless you've personally experienced it, you just never really understand it. So I'm not worried about these kids growing up in like horrible circumstances or anything, but I did find it slightly disturbing at the time, this idea of like women going through this massive, like life-changing, life-threatening thing when they just weren't really sure that they wanted to.
It feels really ancient, but it's still so prevalent.
That's nice.
Deep thoughts from Christina
as she sips the wine. I always thought I'd have children too. And so, although I'm married, I've been married for 10 years. Me and my husband been together for like 1,000 now, like 18. And me and my husband used to have this joke. So being millennials, Friends is my reference point for like 98% of pop culture that I'm going to talk about on this podcast. And there's this episode where Chandler thinks Monica's obsessed with having babies. Babies. That's all you can think about. Babies. And this used to be like our joke that when I got to 30, instead of ground zero, it would be like ground baby. It's like, and it'd be babies in the cupboards, babies under the bed. And like, I got to 30 and we got engaged. So I'm not going to have a baby when I'm engaged. We're going to get married. Next year, we got married. But my business was doing really well. My career was going great. So I'm not going to have children right now. And obviously, when you're in your 20s, when you say, oh, I'd love to have kids, when I'm 30, that's when I'm going to have a family, it feels a very long way away to you. You get to 30 and you realize that actually there's a whole lot more stuff you'd quite like to do. And you're really, hopefully, getting into the swing of the life that you've spent your 20s trying to like create and pull together. And so I got to 30, nope, 31, not yet, 32, not yet, 33, not yet. And then I guess I got to about 36 or 7 and thought, oh, surely if this was really a priority for me, I would want to have children by now. And the reality of being a woman is that you can't be a parent at any age. So you have to make a decision around your 30s as to whether or not this is going to take precedent, maybe over other things that you want to do. And I didn't. I realized I didn't want it enough to balance against everything else that I wanted to do in my life. And like you, I felt that it was very important that children are wanted and have parents that want to give the time and the love and the energy to them. And obviously, I talked about it with my husband, whose opinion I didn't care about. No, I'm joking. Who gets some sort of a say. But he wasn't a very baby person to begin with. Like, his position was very much that, that would be predominantly my choice. In contrast to some of the other couples I know. So he didn't mind. And I'm now like 43, so it would be much more difficult than impossible for me to have a child. But I have definitely over the last few years wanted to just check in and make sure I'm still happy with that and that he's not harboring some crazy resentment that I decided we were never going to have children. But apparently when I was a kid, I was super babies, children, wanted to play with little kids, very family orientated. So just goes to show you can never tell.
But I also think that it goes to show that when we were growing up, at least in my personal childhood, my mom was a super devoted mom, and she'd had a kind of rough childhood and really wanted a family. We felt very loved, very wanted, feel very lucky for that experience. But I feel like we were raised with this concept that it was great, right? Like motherhood was great. And Mom, if you're listening, which I'm sure you are, and I'm grateful for that too, then I know that my mother has struggled with me choosing to not have children because she's always said that is the greatest decision of her life. And my partner's parents said the same thing. They just can't get on board with, because it was a huge commitment and they really willingly chose to do it. And they sacrificed a lot to be parents. They just don't understand why we wouldn't want to make the same sacrifice. I think one of the reasons potentially that there has been this decrease in women having babies is because now people are talking about it more and talking about what being a parent is actually like. And it's not just rosy and wonderful. And do you know what I mean? You're talking about it from your retirement age when you can forget about all the horrible things you had to go through. What do you think about that?
We definitely don't want to make this podcast a statistics thing. No. So that also means that you can't come at us if we get statistics wrong. Or no, listen, I'm very happy to be corrected. But it's not that we've armed with data as we chat to you. But my understanding is that education levels have gone up massively with millennial women. Millennial women are more educated to a higher level than previously any generation of women before. That has an impact, obviously, on the job market, on the age at which you might start a family. We have more options available to us. And I think the sad thing is, we were living in a society that was designed around this idea that men went to work and came home and had a wife, which is basically a secretary for the home, and your childcare assistant and your sexual fantasy partner, all the roles that women have to play, who runs the family. So, men would go to work and be in the world and work and come home and have a wife who would run the home and children and childcare and all of that. It's not designed for women to go to work, do all of those things, and then come home and still have to do, apparently, according to all of the research, well over 50% of the home burdens of labor and childcare as well. So when you have other options available to you, that isn't just being a stay-at-home mum and wife, is it any surprise that women choose to work, to prioritize maybe different purposes that they want to have in life, to be in the world doing things? And the reality is, and I think, this is the kind of generational, women, you have it all. You can have the career and you can have a home life. And I think millennial women are just seeing that did not really pan out as, what did someone say to me once? It's not that women can have it all, it's that they ended up doing it all. And that's not attractive either. So if you have to choose between either or, knowing that doing it both is going to destroy your mental health, is probably going to play a big toll on your family as well, because the mental health of the parents is really important. You're not necessarily going to choose to stay at home and have children, and the working world isn't really designed for women to work and run a family.
But also, again, this is not based in statistics, this is based just in people I know, so take it with a pinch of salt. But a lot of the people that I know, the women in the relationship, they make less money than their male counterparts. And so the cost of nursery care in this country is
Massive.
very high. And so literally it's exactly the same amount of money. So then it becomes like a whole separate conversation around, in your marriage about that it's important to you to go work a job for somebody else, hopefully that you're passionate about and enjoy, but you may very well not. And to do, to sort of do this thing that's not actually contributing in a positive way outside of what you just need as a human being. Do you know what I mean? Like, so then obviously, then there's women who end up just quitting their jobs and staying at home because it costs less, or it costs the same, basically.
Yeah. And very few people love their jobs. Like, that's just a fact.
Yeah.
Very few people love their jobs. And loads of mothers I know talk about this kind of like the mother guilt and like, especially if you work as well. Although I'd also know mothers who don't work or who work isn't a big part of their life and they feel guilty that they're giving like a bad example to their children or their daughters for being a stay-at-home mom. So I think there's definitely this thing of like, you can't win. But what I always find interesting about this is that it's an incredibly modern invention that we had like this kind of trad wife stay-at-home mother situation. That's like a 50s thing post Second World War. Prior to that, wealthy women never raised their own kids. They would birth them, and then you would have a wet nurse and nannies and all this kind of stuff. And working class women worked. They didn't stay at home whilst the fathers went out and earned money and they were just looking after the children. Not post-industrial revolution. And actually, even before that, because you were then on the farm. You had to do the labor of the farm work. So it's very, very new standard, I think, for mothers to hold themselves to. And I get frustrated when I hear a lot of this kind of mother guilt, as if it's been enshrined in our society for so long that all children had a mother who stayed at home with them and cared for their upkeep, and they're somehow doing something monstrous by doing something else. It's not true. It's a very new invention.
But not only that, I think it's also a really, new part of our society to kind of raise your kid alone. Do you know what I mean? We used to live in, and some people still do live in societies where, you are raised by a community. There are other, there's naturally other parents. You don't have to like pay to go to a play group, or there just is a bigger sense of community. And I think, again, in my personal experience, that just wasn't the way that society worked. It was very much like a mom at home by herself, if that's what the situation was, and she maybe could try and meet up with somebody or another parent, but it's not that there was this natural sense of the community was raising children, and therefore the mom would also get a break sometimes.
Yeah, it's very new in like the history of like societies that we live so far from our families, which is part of this extended network.
Yeah.
And we just don't, a lot of us don't really have that. I definitely felt if I had a child, my husband's a chef, he works all the time. My parents are quite a lot older than me. I was the youngest child significantly in the family, that I would have very little help. I do have friends who have children. Some of them work in my field as well. Burlesque mums are a fascinating group. I love them. They'll be the first one over a wine to be like, unless you're desperate for children, do not have them. They are so much work. And I really love like real mothers who don't care about destroying the sort of PR of motherhood and will just tell it like it is. I love them for that. Yeah, so I don't work in an industry that is child friendly. My workplace, if I'm not at home, is an over 18 venue. There's not a crash in the nightclub or I'm putting a show on. So I would always really considered, particularly in the way that my adult relationship panned out, that it would be quite an isolating situation potentially. And that was a big part of the decision not to have children. Maybe if that hadn't have been the case, I would feel very differently.
What's your take on, because you touched on, obviously we have more choices now, and one of those choices is egg freezing. So, my mom encouraged me to do some egg freezing, and I agreed with her, and I decided to do one round. It was super painful, and I was shooting myself up this giant needle. That was the last one. I was like, we are one and done. So I am not interested in another go of this. And I think that also just absolutely solidified I do not want children. But what do you think about companies paying for egg freezing?
Is that a thing?
Oh my God, yeah. Are you kidding me? It's like a big thing in America. It's part of your package. Yeah, this is like one of the perks of the job is that they will pay for, because egg freezing is not cheap, and everything is more expensive in America. So, you know, it's a luxury item. And yeah, no, it's just like part of your perk package.
Oh, God. I mean, I imagine that must be magical in that it's very expensive if you want to do it. But it does sound a little nightmarishly freaky to me. Like, you can work till you almost drop. Don't worry, we'll freeze your babies. But it seems a little creepy to me, but I'm sure lots of people would be like, no, that's like gender equality. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. It has a tinge of natural creepiness to it, but anything to do with your employer and your babies getting over involved feels correct. But at the same time, you know, you go back to this, you know, if working in that job and being, you know, this being your career is important to you and somebody is going to foot the bill for you to continue doing that, knowing that there is time that's going to be better for you to, and this is the really gross part, harvest your eggs. Disgusting. Like medical terminology in general, I find is a tangent, but medical terminology is just so obviously written by a man. No woman on the planet would call it harvesting your eggs. I'm not a farm. Like, I'm not a cow. I'm not a wheat. Like, it's so wrong. But anyways, there's, you know, like you said, like there's sort of a time and a place when your body is most fertile. And if that's the time when you want to be working and they're going to foot the bill for it, I don't know.
Do you know what's so funny is that you said, which is completely understandable, a time that's more convenient for you. But if you think about it, it's really a time that's more convenient for them.
Totally. Yeah.
And it's also really funny that a company would pay, I'm sure, like thousands of pounds at least.
Thousands of pounds.
But they wouldn't install a fucking creche. They wouldn't hire some childcare and maybe offer some timeshare flexible working to their parents. That's so American. Is it? Maybe it's just super corporate.
No. I mean, I don't know. I've never had a big corporate job well, I've never had one anywhere, but I've never had one in the UK, so I don't know. But no, I think it is quite American. In Sweden, you, I think by law, have to be given a year off paid leave. So they can ask you as well in your interview about whether or not you plan on having children. Which in America is like an absolute legal no-no.
Yeah, you can't ask that here either.
Yeah, but for them, it's just supposed to be financial planning and like whether or not they're going to have to figure that out.
I mean, like, I do feel some sympathy for companies. I understand why it's discriminatory to us. But if you're a small company, presumably footing the bill for maternity care, I'm not really au fait with all of the ins and outs because obviously in this country, we also have like government-funded maternity care. It doesn't entirely fall to companies to do it. But that does require some financial planning, again, especially if you're a small company. So it's a very common narrative, I think, that when people choose to not have children, they get vilified by family or friends. And I don't know if that's inflated or whether I've been very lucky. Again, I'm the youngest. I think my parents sort of consider me to lead quite an alternative lifestyle anyway, so maybe they set fire to any dreams of conventionality in my life. And I have an older sister who has 2 children, so that did take some pressure off. So I only really got 2 bits of pressure from my parents, which is when I got married, maybe my mother was like, oh, maybe she is going to be a regular girl after all, and was like, so when are you having children? And then very sweetly and understandably, she pointed out, you're planning on having children soon because I'll be getting to an age where I can't help you and I would like to be able to help you, which is very sweet.
Nice.
Yeah. And so I did get the sense that she was disappointed, but they certainly never pressurized me or demonized me. And I know that's not the case of other people. And then I suppose, I work in burlesque, I work in the arts. I'm not surrounded by a lot of traditional, maybe expectations. So I've been very lucky in terms of criticism. Have you experienced much?
Yeah. And I would say, so it's been different with with Pip, who's my partner now. And I think it's just because, got gray hair showing and everyone probably just thinks I'm too old to have babies. So we're not going to ask that question.
We've aged out of being asked.
Pretty much. But the first time I was married, it was mental. It was just this absolute natural question where people would say, be like, oh, yeah, like I'm just got married, or anytime you mention anything about sort of being at that stage in your life, the automatic next question was, when are you going to have kids? And it was so strange to me because the most random people would ask you. Like, there's no universe in which you'd be asking me any similarly personal question. So why do you think it's appropriate that you should ask me about this? And I think it's just because people think it's so natural, right? That it's just expected. And so therefore, it's not a personal question. It's almost like they have this right to, do you know what I mean? Because it's just what you're going to do, right? So it's just like, what's next? And then the few times that I've mentioned that I wasn't sure, I had some question marks around this, the automatic answer was just, oh, well, you've got time. And you will, like, you'll get there, as if it was just, again, it was just going to be innate. That was just what was going to happen. And so I definitely got a lot of it before, but I wouldn't say, I suppose I wasn't at the time being really vocal about not having children. So I didn't experience that kind of criticism. And I'm also lucky my parents have tried many times to have a sit down and convince me about the benefits of motherhood, of which I'm sure there are many, but they have not succeeded. They've lost those battles, and I think they've lost the war at this point.
Yeah, you've reminded me. I have escaped critique from the family, but I've gotten a lot from my Uber drivers.
Well, there we go.
They're bizarrely, hugely impassioned and quite invasive pleas and discussions. I think my favorite one was, and like to an extent, some of it's just like social chit chat. I don't mind. Like, oh, are you married? Yes. Do you have children? No. And this driver told me once that my husband secretly did want to have children, and that I was ruining his life and that I should make him happy by having babies.
Oh my God.
And this is why when I order my Ubers now, I press no conversation.
And you just reminded me, I did have one shocking experience here. So I got recommended, the first time I kind of started to think about doing egg freezing, I got recommended by my GP to an IVF center, down the road. And so I went in. The appointment was with a gynecologist who was in, very, very esteemed, lots of awards and everything, older woman. And she asked me about my relationship. And so I explained that I'm in a very happy, very monogamous relationship, that we're, in our eyes, married already. We were going to get married at some point legally, but that we're just not sure about wanting to have children. So we figured we'd freeze and then we'll decide. Most likely we're not going to, but then at least you have the option. And she literally had the audacity to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. You're in a consensual monogamous relationship at 38 and you want to freeze your eggs? You should just have a baby. Sorry. Do you not want my money?
I know. Sorry, have I accidentally wandered into an NHS surgery where I have to put up with this kind of shit because it's free?
I'm pretty sure I'm paying you. This is a service that I'm receiving now. You're going to get a unhappy face when I walk in. But I found that really
savage.
Right? Like, how is it appropriate to say to somebody?
I just think there's a whole realm of things that relate to women, especially women's healthcare, which means that stuff comes out of people's mouths that they would never ever say in any other situation. And it's wild.
Yeah.
Can I have a controversial pet peeve?
Sure.
I appreciate that it must be really difficult if you're a woman who wants children but is having difficulty conceiving and maybe it isn't finite, like there's a possibility that you could, but you tell everybody that you hate children and that you never want children. And when people around you talk about how they don't want children, women, you go, yeah. Because I really think it plays into this narrative that we will change our minds. Like women especially when you're younger, again, this is less of an issue for us, that like, oh, okay, but you'll change your mind when you're older. You'll change your mind when you're older. And look, some people do change their mind when they're older, but I know of at least a few, not loads, but a small, significant handful of women in this situation who have done that, but then who, which is wonderful for them, have gone on to actually get pregnant later in life and gone on to have 1, 2, 3 children. And I just think, can you please not contribute to this narrative that women who say that they don't want children are deluding themselves, will change their minds, don't really know what they want? There's a whole thing of women going to the doctors to ask about having, is there a hysterectomy? What is it, like the women's version of a vasectomy?
I don't know, but yeah.
But yeah, so you physically can't have children, and being refused because they might change their mind, or you might get married and your husband will want children. Like, these are not uncommon stories at all. So I'm just like, listen, I get it, ladies, but maybe can you find a different way of batting off the question about why you don't have children? It isn't, oh my goodness, I couldn't ever have children, I hate them. That grateful from a child-free by choice lady, thank you, on behalf of the rest of the sisterhood.
Yes, no, I would agree with that. I mean, just how other women, handle the conversation around, well, yeah, you just not having children is always interesting. Because I do find even if I haven't been criticized about it, it is that thing of, oh, you'll change your mind. And again, it's like, why do you think that I don't say to you, you don't have a decision, like the ability to make decisions on your own? I'm not infantilizing you, so why are you doing that to me?
Yeah, I wonder if it's rooted in, of course, this whole like, women don't really know their own minds. You're just a lady with our little lady brains.
I think it's they've just gone through trauma. They want to trauma bond together. They're annoyed that you might avoid the trauma.
Oh my God, when you say that, and I know a girl who got pregnant but decided not to have children in her 30s, or married, like in a position whereby lots of people might feel that they would have children, but she didn't want to. That's her choice. Her husband also agreed. Like, it was a joint decision. And she said that the shit that she got from her friends who had children was really revolved around this idea of like, well, we had to do it, so what's your problem? Like, why do you get to opt out of this thing we've all had to do? And that's the first time I'd heard something like that before. And I was really shocked, actually.
I don't know. I think I've seen it. I don't find it that shocking, because I think it'll come out in other parts of this podcast and on some of the other topics that we're going to cover is this sort of shared trauma and this annoyance if somebody skips out of it somehow, willingly and knowingly.
Yes. Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Should we go back, rewind in time to when, at a stage in your life when you thought that you might have children? And what do you think is different mentally? Like, was it just circumstantial, or was it, are we okay to talk about this?
Yeah. Yes, I can talk about this. That's a good question. I think being younger, the hypothetical nature of motherhood is different to when you get a little older, the reality of what your life is. As we age, our lives become less malleable. When you're in your 20s, things are a bit more chaotic anyway. And it reminds me of something performer told me her mother said, which was that when her mother had children, and this performer has children, hey baby, you'll be listening, I'm sure, and you'll know that I'm talking about you, that her mother said, oh, we had our babies when we were in our early 20s. And so the whole of life was quite chaotic. And in a way, it was easier because we had much less time to lay down the patterns of our adulthoods. And so children had less to disrupt. Whereas the older you get, you create the life that you want. And then something comes along that's going to completely upend that. And I've always been, actually, for my whole of my life, somebody who said, oh, I think it's much better if people have children older because they have more life experiences. They have more, they've done things that they want to do in their life. So hopefully they're a better rounded person. They don't resent maybe having to give up so much. There's this whole thing of like, if I hadn't have had you, I could be off doing X, Y, and Z. Like, hopefully you've done some of your X, Y, and Z, so you weren't so pissed about it. But I thought she made a really valid point, actually. And I definitely had an element of, which would be different to when I looked back in, times in my 20s where maybe I thought, oh yeah, I could have children. I saw myself, I suppose, in a more trad wifey role where I'd glamorized, and look, I think it's lovely if you want it, this idea of like having a beautiful life, but my role within it was very much in the home and the family, and I was the sort of person who is in charge of all of that. But I went on to be in charge of a whole company, and I got that through a completely different source that not necessarily would have to stop, but would be very different. And so when I was having these thoughts in seriousness, when I was in my mid-30s, unlike in my 20s, I actually had achieved, I suppose, what I wanted through different means and would have had to have lost all of that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. And I think there's definitely a beautiful way of looking at it that, yeah, like life's chaotic. And so you sort of form yourself with your child. And that's all just like part and parcel of your history. And again, if you want that and you are, want to be a mother, then I think that's amazing, right? That's an amazing journey to go through. But I think when I look back at myself, I don't feel that I was as formed as a person back then as I am now. So I think I probably also would have avoided having some of the hard conversations around what is our parenting style? Like, what is also like, what is my ability to, because I would agree with you, I would probably see myself a little bit more in a trad wife, scenario, but I have always run businesses. I have always, been very entrepreneurial, hustling in one way or another. And so, it's unlikely that just would have like evaporated that side of me. And, like going out and like hustling money is not the same thing as having a child. It's a very different side to yourself. So like, these conversations, I have a lot of friends now who, their children are 6, 7, 8, 10, and they've been the primary caregiver for a long time. And they're now having conversations with their husband where they're bringing in outside help, or he's sometimes taking leave so that she can go and put her career first. But those kinds of conversations, again, one of many hard conversations that need to happen. I don't think I would have been in a position to have them. And I wonder are people now having those conversations, or they're just thinking about it and then they're realizing, like when it comes to sort of population decrease, and then they're just...
I don't think people are having those conversations.
They're not just more fully
No, I still think people are having kids and people are getting married and not once discussing finances and shit, or getting married, or settling down in long-term relationships, whether you choose to get married or not, and not having discussions about values, about money, about debt, which is disturbing for sure. My mother said this thing which I love but didn't think much at the time, and it's to do with motherhood, but when people close to me started having children, and you know what, when I got a dog, both of us have dogs, very millennial.
For a baby.
Yes, very millennial. She said, you'll never know the man you marry until you have children. Yes. I know, it's so apocalyptic. You'll get to know my mother, if you're listening and you don't already, through other ways of knowing me. She will become, I suppose, a bit like your mother, the two silent partners of this podcast ever, expressing their opinions through us in agreement or disagreement. And it was such a funny thing to say, as in like, oh, okay, that I never really thought much about it. But it's true, because you suddenly see this other person handle a situation that is so outside of what you talk about when you're dating and when there's just the two of you, and it is all of a sudden all about the unwritten expectations of who does what work, how you discipline your children. That's huge, and maybe probably not something people massively talk about. And all of that all of a sudden comes into play in a situation where the woman is really vulnerable. She's vulnerable physically and she's vulnerable financially. And so maybe we're just getting into the section where just like, please, sweet Jesus, can you have these discussions? Because having these fights when you are in a position where you are vulnerable is not a great situation to be in by any stretch of the imagination. And it was more true, I suppose, for my mother's generation, because they didn't live together for such long periods of time before they got married. You probably knew your partner less anyway. But even just in getting the dog, me and my husband had lived together for like it's like 11 years or something. All of a sudden, we're having this huge row over who walks her the most that week and how you discipline the dog on the same page. So, yeah, she's not wrong.
No, she's not wrong. She's not wrong. And I agree with you. If this podcast is anything, it should be a PSA for have the hard conversations.
Yes. Or at least just advocate for yourself. So this leads me on to something when we were having like the pre-chat about what we might talk about in this. I flagged this expression that gets used a lot in men's circles, not like incel circles, but like circles where men sort of talk to each other about like personal development and like, you know, go and get that great life you want and you can have it all and all of these sort of, what would that even be called? Like
motivation.
Yeah, like men's bromancy, motivational self-help stuff. You know, some of which could be very useful because men give each other very different advice to how women give each other advice. And one of the little sayings is, her looks won't raise your children. And actually, when I first heard it, I was like, oh, fuck, that's a great piece of advice to give young men. Like, yeah, you can sit and unpick all of the kind of sexism that sits in some of it, fine. But the fact of the matter is that I don't think there's an equivalent for women and to say to young women about how to choose a partner, especially to raise children with. Why not?
Yeah. And I think it would be, I would go one step further and say that I think it's probably frowned upon to be open about sort of vetting and judging, you know, your partner as a future spouse and parent. And I think it would be seen as almost like antiquated in a way, or that you're seen as a gold digger or superficial, but it's not. I mean, this is, you know, marriage is, it's about a life partner. You can get rid of all that romance because
in the bin.
Let me tell you.
Let I tell you.
Just kidding. I love you, babe. But
I say it to Luke's face.
but yeah, but I mean the foundation of a marriage is like the phrase goes for the guys. It's not about how hot you are for somebody or how hot they look, because that's also going to go at some point. It is about, you know, your values and your morals and how you see the world and what kind of life you want and what you want for your family and everything else.
Yeah. It really upsets me there's no female version of that because there's just, okay, let me rephrase it this way. I think it's incredibly statistically rare that women have children and can just easily, do I even mean that, what I'm trying to say? It's an annoying ramble. Because of the nature of motherhood, and again, like I've talked before, like the vulnerability of when you're a mother and when you're pregnant in a way that doesn't impact men who are becoming fathers, your choice of partner not only indicates the person you are going to have to probably deal with for the next at least 18 years of your life, they impact your financial security, your personal safety. The most dangerous time for a woman in terms of domestic violence with a partner is when she is pregnant. Like, can we just please put that on giant billboards at an age where women might be thinking of having children? You have to choose wisely. Look, there's no way you can predict whether or not you are going to end up in a situation that's abusive, or it's not always possible to predict. Nobody chooses willingly. Yeah, like, to, you know, oh, he treated me like crap. I must have a baby with this guy immediately. But they say there are red flags and there are ways that you can trust your instincts. And the fact of the matter is that I just wish that there was, like with men, this tradition of assessing the other person and their suitability for the roles that you want them to play in your life. Men have been vetting women as partners since the idea of marriage first began. Is she rich enough? Is she fertile enough? Is her father wealthy enough? Is she hot enough? Like, all of this stuff is just part and parcel of the marriage contract since the beginning. But like you said, it's almost considered abhorrent to do it the other way around. But women are far more vulnerable than men in that way.
Well, yeah, but I also think that women were, and unfortunately in parts of the world and certain parts of our own society, are still considered property. So, you know, it wasn't her place to make a judgment call. But, you know, thankfully, most of the people probably listening to this podcast, we all do live in a society where you do have some level of control over this, and therefore you should be exerting said control. And yeah, putting your practicality hat on, and that this is about the foundation of your whole life. You should not be placing yourself as a second-class citizen in it. Yeah.
Yes.
Take control. Take control. Now, what else did we talk about? Interested. So, should we talk about the population deficit?
Let's do it.
And Hungary and their laws?
Yes. Can I lead into that?
Yeah.
Oh, I've got to lead into it.
No, go for it.
So I think with our generation, particularly at the older end, the decision to not have children was sort of also given this slight moral sheen by this idea that we were like overpopulating the planet and, climate change and global warming. And that it was actually, I think, a 180, not 360, a 180 happened, whereby it was almost selfish to keep having children because we were destroying the earth. But actually, turns out that while we are still a very, very populated planet, we are actually in a population deficit. Is that what it's called?
Well, so interesting. So it's a population deficit, but only in the Western world and only in specific countries. So I don't know if globally we're in a population deficit.
I looked it up this morning. And we are overall globally. The only place that is still having a population spurt, I think, is in parts of Africa. I don't know about India because India's population, I think, just took over China as being as fastest growing or something. But China is having a population deficit. Japan is well below replacement rate. We'll explain what that means in a second. Parts of Asia, is it South Korea? Again, well below replacement rate. So it's not just a Western thing, although it is very prevalent in particularly like Western Europe and America. Maybe a little bit more so than Eastern Europe. So again, I looked this up for you guys, so I didn't get it wrong. Replacement rate means that the number of children being born replaces the aging population, which is what you need to be able to maintain pensions and have the amount of taxes being paid that you need to run the social services that you have in your country, particularly looking after the elderly. It's not just the birth rates going down. I'm guessing it's just people are living a lot longer as well. Replacement rate in the UK should be 2.1, which means that every woman, love it, should be having 2.1 children. But at the moment, our rate is 1.49, give or take. That's in 2022. It's been falling since 2010. It's even lower in the States.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I do know that there's some governments that are doing some things to combat this. So
yes.
Well, there are some with more nefarious means. So the Hungarian government, in something that I don't find appalling, is offering so women under 30 who are mothers of one child or 10 children, doesn't matter, have no income tax. And they found that that's the most effective thing in terms of getting the population to rise. And then the second thing that they offer a lot of things but related to this, is that any mother of any age who has 4 children will pay no income tax for the rest of her life, which is an interesting one. And obviously in America, you have certain states where you don't pay income tax, but you still have federal tax. And they will also pay for IVF. And then there's a whole bunch of other sort of tax credits and incentives that they give. But they have found it to be working pretty substantially.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
stuff like that I can super get on board with. I'm firm in the belief that we are still unusual, you and I. Most women tend to want to have children, but a lot of them don't because they feel that they can't afford to, that there isn't enough support for them available. And so I'm all in support of government policies, socialism, that helps motherhood, parenthood, because at the end of the day, if you don't have children, there is no society. Again, you could argue that maybe we shouldn't be having them at the rate in terms of like the planet and stuff that we are, but we are getting into this situation whereby, again, we money in, money out, like you have essential services that need to run. But you've suggested or you've highlighted some great policies. There are obviously people using more coercive, abusive policies, retracting access to reproductive rights, to contraception, to abortion, which obviously we don't agree with.
Disgusting. Yeah. I mean, yeah, my mom volunteered at Planned Parenthood, which is a free clinic for sexual health in general, but specifically it gets targeted a lot because of abortion, and that they do those for free. But yeah, it's super important to my mom. It's always been super important to me. I think it's just beyond words what's happened in the U.S. But yeah, I mean, obviously we don't agree with those kinds of coercive routes. That's hideous. But it's something that's important to know about and to look into. And if unfortunately you live in a place where that's the case, then making sure you are educating yourself so you can fight it. What do you think about the concept that when we talk about these things, we always assume that we're talking about people having their own children, that we never talk about the possibility of adoption?
Oh, and well, because those babies already exist. So they're not being factored into the...
Well, they're not being factored into the national, like they're factored into the global one, but they, if you adopt a baby from another country.
Oh, well, that's very controversial for some people. Yeah.
Should we go down that controversial route?
No, I don't think it's bad to talk about it. So this doesn't exist in America. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there are very strict guidelines here over adoption, intraracial adoption. So again, I'm really happy to be corrected on this, but my understanding is you cannot through the state do intraracial adoption because it's deemed to have a negative impact on the child. And they have studies for this. Now, I have not read any of these studies, so this is a totally uneducated opinion. But sometimes I do wonder whether leaving a child as the ward of the state is more detrimental to putting them in a loving home that might not be of their direct ethnicity, as long as the parents can show connections to the child's heritage through other means. I mean, maybe I'm being very naive and they looked at this and it didn't work, but it just seems so harmful to me to think of children growing up with no stable, loving, permanent home, because being in state care is not pretty, even in a country whereby, again, we maybe compared to the States, we have more socialist infrastructure around us. Being in care, being in foster care is bleak. The outcomes for those children are not good. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would take the same stance. Obviously, I haven't read the studies either, and I'm sure the people who've done them have, hopefully done a very good job. But I would, on surface levels, certainly agree with you. I think there's another very controversial topic, which is that obviously, if you're trying to adopt a child, and I'm not talking, I think fostering children can sometimes be, I know people who have been in those situations and they've, really not been good because you do get nefarious characters. And in the US, unfortunately, there isn't enough oversight over who is fostering children. But, I think if for probably a lot of couples that are going to adopt, they really want a baby, they want a child, they're providing a stable home. And that's a beautiful and wonderful thing for a child, particularly one who is already born and that's not a necessarily guaranteed outcome for them. So what I find interesting is that we make couples who want to adopt go through so many hoops, yet people who maybe should absolutely not be parents by anyone's decision, sort of ticking any box, nobody would approve of this scenario besides them, just naturally get pregnant and are able to have kids.
Yeah.
And there's no oversight on it.
Seems wild.
Yeah.
I totally get what you're saying. Do you want to know something even more hideous than the corporate egg freezing, which I'd forgotten about until this morning when I knew we were going to talk about this? I fully read this in a mainstream newspaper that some guy, see, now you know it's factual, but his answer to some academic put forward this theory that the answer to population decline and also women and families who want children, but maybe the women can't bear the children, is to use women who are in medical comas as surrogates, unconscious surrogates. Talk about just come up with the worst thing you can think of and then just make it worse. Like, the horror.
God, talk about violation. Violation.
Like, for me, like, this, if you just want to sum up or you want to prove that we live in a society that treats women as like the servants of humanity, does somebody actually had this idea, wrote it down, and then it got published in a mainstream newspaper as like, well, hey, it's just a suggestion.
Oh my God. Like, are there necromancy police? Because I feel like they should also go looking into this guy.
Right? I mean, taking aside the huge horror that obviously you cannot get the consent of this woman for this to happen to her body. Also, the thing I find interesting is there no consideration for the fact that this child is growing up inside a body that is biologically functioning but not mentally functioning? As if women are just interchangeable ovens and there's no kind of biological need in mammals to share a bond in utero, like that the baby doesn't benefit from being within a living, breathing, dreaming, loving home inside its mother. All of that just doesn't really count for anything. And I just thought, I can just imagine that a whole load of people think that, because we know so little really about motherhood, so little about women's biology. And we therefore sort of live in this weird world where people can completely kind of think, oh, well, a womb is just some kind of interchangeable laboratory oven. Like, what the hell?
They also think that eggs should be harvested. My little eggs, my little possible babies should be rounded up with the machinery, dragged into the freezer. Oh my God. I literally, when I was getting ready for the surgery, one of the nurses walked by, and I also thought this is very insensitive because I'm also called a geriatric.
Oh, yes.
According to medical terminology.
The threshold for that's super low, isn't it?
It's like 32. Don't quote me on this, but like 32, I want to say.
Yeah, give or take, because I was thinking like 31, 32. Yeah. Yes. Too funny.
But she's talking about, she got somebody last week and they had 77 eggs harvested. And then I only had 8. Felt very rude that she was talking about it.
Failed as a woman. Your only use in life, and you failed miserably.
I know. But it does bring up an interesting question around sort of surrogacy. So I will share a story which, dear listener, please don't judge me too much for. This is the point, is we're sharing about ourselves. And you may think I'm a terrible monster, but so be it. But I was having a conversation with my mom. And to be fair, I had not really thought this all the way through. We were having a casual chat about if I ever was going to have a baby, that now that I had my 8 frozen eggs, that I would hire a surrogate, because no part of me wants to go through the trauma that is like the trauma and delight. Like you just said, obviously there is this natural bonding that happens hopefully with a baby in utero. And it's, again, when it happens, I'm sure it's a really beautiful thing and not to be diminished, but it's not something that I have ever craved. We've talked about this before. That biological urge that some women have to want babies just never existed.
Yeah.
For us. Yeah. So, I was like, well, we'll just have a surrogate. And my mom thankfully put me in check a little bit, but she was horrified. And she was like, well, so what you're saying to me is that you are wealthy enough that you are happy to endanger the life of another woman so that you don't have to go through the inconvenience of childbirth, but you want the joy of having a child. And I was like, well, when you put it like that.
It's savage. But yeah, I mean, obviously you and I discussed this, and I don't think you should feel bad maybe for not having thought about it that way, because I never really thought about surrogacy at all until I started doing a lot more feminist research and started reading about this idea of like split self in women, and into which comes surrogacy. And I hadn't thought really about it. I agree with your mum. And there are lots of other we'll get into surrogacy, I'm sure, in another issue or another episode, because it's such a massive topic. But it's one of those weird things where I think there's a very concerted effort to not have an open conversation about surrogacy and what it means as an industry and what it means to women and which women. So it doesn't surprise me at all, especially since it's often fettered by like celebrities. And I always find it wild when I read stuff, which happens a lot now because I think celebrities are more open about having babies through surrogacy. And there was the meme the other day or a reel, and it was like, blah, blah, did this at this age, blah, blah, did this at this age. Ex-celebrity had her baby at 54. Well, she didn't. She paid a woman who needed the money to go through the pregnancy on her behalf so she could have the baby, but she didn't want to have the pregnancy. It was like this whole weird glossing over of the fact that this is actually a really important thing as a society. I don't think we should just be like, oh, that sounds fine, let's not look at it.
No, totally. And again, I think we will get into surrogacy sort of further down the road because it is such a big topic. But it does throw up the question, is it a basic human right to have a child? But I think for surrogacy, it's also, is it a basic human right to have your child? Because if you take the stance that it is your right to have a child, let's suppose you're, a gay couple and you want to have a baby, and obviously that's not biologically possible for either one of you, then yes, but adoption is there. And I think it's this thing which like nobody seems to want to talk about. And I'm not sure where that comes from, because again, I'm missing the gene where you get the biological clock and you just really want your own baby. It's not in me, so I can't speak to it as much or at all. But yeah, I find it bizarre that sort of just, they're sort of conflated into one rather than being seen as two separate things.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, so for me, one of the things that have helped with my decision to not have children is that I am not wed to this idea of having to have my own biological children. So I've always said, yeah, fine. If I get to 50 and I realize that I've made a huge mistake of my life, I'm not saying adoption is easy. I'm told by multiple people that it is not, but it is an option that is there for me. I don't need to have my own biological children. And I just think, like, yes, I get, and people get very emotional about this, and I completely understand. There's intersecting rights here because sorry, you're twisting and turning here, but let me bring up another example whereby we actually say that the harms outweigh the benefits to some individuals. We don't sell organs.
Well, I mean, they do, but
we don't.
Publicly.
Okay, we don't legally sell organs. Like, I could give a kidney. We have two of those, right? If I was so desperate that I needed cash, I can't sell my kidney, even though I can
not legally
exist with, as you keep saying, or my eye or something that I could exist without, because we deem that it's so coercive, that there's such a line that's so dangerous to cross between how that could be abused, how people be coerced into it. And for me, surrogacy, it's kind of the same. The only reason where this isn't being looked at in the same way, in my opinion, is because it involves women. Somehow women are cast into this category whereby it's our natural order in the world to be the person who has to give up their boundaries, risk their life, be in service to other. Well, these people want their babies. Off you go, Mandy. You've had a baby before. Can't you just churn out another one? Being pregnant isn't a job. And again, having a baby taken away from, people say, well, it's not its mother because it's not its egg. I've said we're not going to talk about it, so now we're talking about it. But actually, a lot of surrogacy also involves using the surrogate mother's egg. But even if that's not the case, that baby has still been inside that mother for 9 months, and then they get taken away immediately. There are lots of arguments around surrogacy. This is only one. But on that alone, the trauma to the mother, the birth mother, and to the baby cannot just be swept away, I think, in a sort of haze of Hollywood sheen. There are some really, really big ethical questions here. And I really hope, because I think surrogacy is going to be one of the next hot topics, that these aren't also kind of put in this little box that we can never ask anything about, because there are some really important questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think any time that somebody's life is at risk, it should be acceptable to have debate about it and to be able to discuss it and talk about it, because that's the point of humanity, is we are on some level trying to look out for each other and take care of each other.
Oh, that's lovely.
Going back to this sort of like horrendous way of trying to push women into having babies is also, so on a lighter note, rather than the horrendous ways in which women are being oppressed into having more children in some parts of the world.
Yeah, we really structured that badly when it came to ending on a high.
Yeah, I know. How do you feel, Tempest Rose, when you hear a man say, "We're pregnant"?
It makes me want to throw up in my mouth. I think I should get an award for not punching a man every time I hear him say, "We're pregnant." Oh, fuck off. I'm perfectly happy with we're having a baby. That's a nice joint situation. No, I hate it. You?
Yeah, I think there's like the less mature side of me that's like, oh, it's cute and it's nice. And then you sort of step back as with a little bit more wisdom, you say, it's not cute and it's not nice, because it's not, it's not acknowledging what your partner is going through. Like you said, we're having a baby. Absolutely. Like that's like joint ownership of the situation and you're excited about it. Hopefully it comes with a positive tone of voice. And that's fabulous. But your wife is, or your female partner is going to be the one actually doing the work and going through the intense 9 months that is yet to come. So, and the birthing and everything else post-birth. So, yeah, I'm not a fan.
It's a no.
It's a no from us.
It's a no. Anyway, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.
Tune in to find out what we're going to talk about next.
Yes, indeed. More fabulous thoughts on how our culture is on the rocks.